Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, we are on air now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new session of Tech Athena and a very happy new year. For those of you who are new to Tech Athena is a platform where we discuss about bleeding edge or cutting edge technologies which are going to affect your data center or the way your enterprise is going to function. And I'm your host, Deepthi. And with me, I have Shalaka, my co host. Shalaka.
Hey, hi everyone. Happy New Year to all of you. So today's topic, guys, we are going to talk about storage security. And let me set a little bit of context here. Security has been sort of gaining the visibility and the center of thought processes in almost all enterprise transformations, basically because of the way the world is getting connected and we are exposing our data more and more to stakeholders within businesses as well as the outside of the businesses to take advantage and find more insights, build different business models, etc. Right now, the problem is it is also getting exposed to a lot of exploiters who can be outside as well as inside, and the challenge is the trust part, right? I mean, once you sort of burn your fingers, probably uh, you're probably not going to go to the same organization or same business with your additional data and trust the business again. So for the enterprises, it becomes imperative to put the practices in place to protect and govern the data in a way that can protect their own brand value and minimize their liabilities and risks in the long run. And that is why it is sort of taking a huge center stage. Now, inside the data security and data governance, it's a vast topic in itself. The security is the vast topic in itself. Uh, but the foundational pillar where all the data basically resides at rest is your storage infrastructure. And we are today going to focus on the tricks, the functionalities, the practices you can put in place to secure that foundational pillar in your overall data platform. With me, I have today's speaker, Sandeep, who is actually a master inventor in IBM, a very strong contributor into the development platform of storage, has been instrumental in lot of inventions on distributed file systems, also appears on the inventor list worldwide Wikipedia. So please welcome him and let us hear from him his own thoughts about what he thinks would be a game-changing scenario in storage security. Over to you, Sandeep.
Hey, thank you, Salaka, and thank you for inviting me at the Techathon. Uh, and a very happy New Year to our audience here. So let's get started. I'm going to share the screen. I think Shalaka has set the stage and the intro such that, as she rightly said, that it is a very vast topic, but it is a foundational topic. And hence today, what we would be doing is kind of covering a lot of foundational uh, topics. Just give me a second. Yes, we'll be covering a lot of foundational topics of storage for security, and I'll also pass you some of the trends that I see in storage security that we more or less have been encountering in various deployments. So Shalaka has already introduced me quickly. I am Sandeep Patil. I work as an storage architect with the Systems Lab. I am a SNIA Technical Council member of India. And if you're not aware of SNIA, there's something that I'd like to expose you all to in subsequent slides. So let's get started. So why information security, right? Shalaka very rightly said, right? It becomes one of the most foundational topics for any data center. But why do we want to bother? Do we say, you know what, information security has been there since ages? Should I still be bothered about it? And what are the changing trends and why should I be bothered about it today? And why more specifically with respect to storage? So let's get some context here. So I have few slides here. Let me start my laser pointer. Yes. So I pulled this information from the World Economic Forum 2018 survey that was published recently. And if you see this particular chart, it talks about business impacts and the likelihood of the event occurring. And cyber attacks was rated 3 among the perception that each and every industry, be it enterprise, be it small to medium sized businesses, consider as something that would impact their business, right? So clearly, as per the World Economic Forum, very latest at 2018, cyber attacks comes in the top 3, not even top 5, in terms of something that we as business owners need to be concerned of, right? Attack against businesses have almost doubled in the last 5 years, right? So while we are trying to increase the security of our data centers, we are trying to increase the security of our cloud deployments, the attacks also are increasing at least 5 times the pace that it used to few years back. And I have some more examples that we will get into. So what is the essence or the takeaway from the slide is that cyber attacks is the top 3 concerns for all the CIOs of any organization. Now let's move further, right? So why information security? To add to what we talked about the World Economic Forums, here are some more data points that I collected, right? Ransomware attacks. It's very important to understand what are ransomware attacks, because they actually got a lot of businesses on knees in the year 2017, even spilled over in 2018, right? So ransomware attacks, simply put, is the kind of lock your data and the malicious users ask you for uh, some kind of favor. Typically it is in terms of monetary benefits, and only when you pay the favor they are able to give your data back, right? So these are some of the statistics around ransomware attacks. So ransomware attacks are also soaring, rising from 3.2 million in 2014, where people thought it is just another cyber attack, till 2017, where there were more than 200,000 victims in 150 countries, right? And I myself was involved in one of the ransomware attacks where I had to help a particular customer get out of it. So another report from Cybersecurity Ventures, it says cybercrime as a whole will cost the world about 6 trillion by 2021, right? And we want to make sure that we are not in the business where we will lose money and contribute to the 6 trillion of monetary loss due to data loss. So during the first 6 months in 2017, there was 918 reported breaches, right? That comprised 1.9 billion data records. Right now, all these statistics are showing how much of data breaches are actually increasing. Now, this is a very nice snippet that I took from the IBM X Force report. What it shows is different types of attacks across different years that we had from 2015, 16, and 17. And you see all these dots as different types of attacks. It's very important to understand what are these different types of attacks, because only when you kind of understand these threat agents and what are the threats that potentially impact your data center or your deployments, you will be able to then plan the security for your deployments, data centers, and eventually storage where actually the data resides, right? So I don't want to deep dive here. We will touch about it later on. But if you see, there's a lot of misconfiguration that happens by administrator that results in data loss or um, potential breach, right? If you see DOS attacks, right? DOS attacks are something that does not necessarily result in a data loss, but it actually gets your services down, impacting the business, right? So this is a very good graph which kind of shows you what kind of attacks were really targeted on the industry over a period of time from 2015 to 17, right? The 2018 figures, I was told, is still being worked on. So let's move on. So I gave you a global context of security breaches. We talked about the global forums and the perception of cyber threat. But what does it mean in Asia in the context that we actually are living in, right? So if you really see the Asian ecosystem, and I just wanted to, picked up uh, some of the some of the data points from reports that are very specific to the Asian businesses, right? Over 50% of Asian organizations that adopt cloud services sees data theft as their primary risk, right? So the trend, while globally it is the same in Asia, in fact, from number 3, it comes to number 1, right? 59% of AP organizations are detecting businesses interrupting security breaches, right? And that has actually been growing 2 times than the previous years, right? 38% of companies consider a data breach that becomes public and a fireable offense, right? Because generally when there is a data breach, someone has to take the responsibility, and eventually even it results into job terminations. Cyber threats increase. Companies increasingly are focused on protecting their data and assets. Like 95% of Asian organization, and very important, when I say organization, it does not mean enterprises. It actually means enterprises and the SMBs, right? The small to medium sized businesses plan to increase their budget on IT security. Two-thirds of the C-level executives in Asia have high or very high involvement whenever there is cybersecurity activities that happen. So long story short, what has happened is that if you are as an IT architect or as a deployment architect, right, you have to ensure that your architecture or your deployment is planned in such a way so that you protect the brands from the persistent digital threats. So what we have summarized in the last 3 slides is how important is security in general, and it continues to be because cyber threats and cyber attacks continue to grow uh, year after year. So as we now appreciate in a nutshell why information security is important, let us go and do some quick recap of information security. So I'm going to do a quick recap of basic security basics, right? Again, today's presentation is more for generally practitioners and not really for security developers. But this particular slide that I'm going to talk about is actually applicable whether you are actually a developer in security or storage, or if you are an actual practitioner or an IT architect. These are the core fundamentals of security, which is not going to change irrespective of the domain that you work in, irrespective of the age or era of IT that you have worked in or will work in. Once you know this slide, you know 50% of what is security, right? So security basics, a quick recap. The CIA trait of confidentiality, integrity, and availability is the heart of information security. This is a very important, it's a very simple but very important uh, diagram out here. What it is showing is at the core of information security, which I would want to call it as information assurance, over a period when we actually want to ensure that the information assurance is up to date. It contains confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And information sits right in between it, right? And these are typically the key tenets for even risk management, right? When you have to manage the risk, when you have to categorize the risk, these are the 3 tenets that you have to consider when you do that. And then what surrounds it are the other elements which we use for information, like communication, software, hardware. And then you create services out of that. So that becomes the next uh, concentric circle. And then what surrounds it is typically the products, people, and procedures. Procedures when they apply with organizational securities or business policies and securities. People, it comes to personal security and how people actually handle security. People plays a very important part in the entire security management. And products, which also involves physical security. So these are the key CIA attributes of information security. Now that we understand that these are the key attributes of in general information security, it's important for us to understand what do they mean, right? So I've picked up some dictionary definitions of them, right? For example, confidentiality. It is the property that information is not made available or disclosed to unauthorized individual entities or processes. What it means in a very generic term or in a storage term, it means, hey, is the data secure? in motion, in rest. Basically, are you using encryption, and is it authorized and authenticated, right? Where authorization, authentication becomes the prereq, but the confidentiality comes down to encryption of data. Integrity. So the definition says it means maintaining and assuring the accuracy and completeness of data over the entire life cycle. So this in itself is pretty obvious. Integrity means your data is what it was supposed to be. It's not kind of tampered with, right? The integrity of data is actually intact. Availability. For any information system to serve its purpose, the information must be available when it is needed, right? It's very important. People don't consider, sometimes say, hey, is availability a part of information security? Absolutely it is, right? Because of security breaches, while there will not be a data breach or a data leakage, you can potentially impact the availability, directly impacting the business, and then hence the cost. Then what are the other definitions that we need to remember or understand? Authentication, right? As per the definition, is the act of verifying a claim of identity. In storage terminologies, whenever you access data, you need to be an authenticated user, if I have to put it in a very naive language. Authorization is the functionality of specific access rights privilege to resources related to information security, right? So in storage, or let's say in a file system world, you can always consider authorization like ACLs, right? The access control list. Non-repudiation. One party of a transaction cannot deny having received a transaction, nor can the other party deny having sent a transaction, right? That's a very generic definition of non-repudiation, applicable everywhere. When you talk about websites with HTTPS, but even in terms of storage, non-repudiation means if a particular server, let's say, I'm just making a hypothetical example, is going to serve some file storages to the client, the server should ensure and the client should be able to say that this particular data was sent by this particular server, and the server and should not be able to deny that I did not send this data, right? So that is in context of file server capabilities of what is non-repudiation. So once you have these basics concepts, and they are so simple definitions of confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication, authorization, non-repudiation. One thing that I didn't cover was privacy, where privacy is a little larger topic, where confidentiality comes under the privacy domain, right? These really form the ethos of information security, right? And everything actually folds under this, whether it is network security, whether it is storage security, whether it is IoT security, whether it is cloud security, right? And the CIA always remains the same concept irrespective of the deployment and the domains. Now let's now that we have covered the security basics, let's move on. Now coming to this topic for today, right? Storage security. Why and what is it? Right? You have said, hey, I understand security. If you have a networking guy, you say, I understand what is network security. What is storage security and why it is important? So as we know today, data is the new oil, right? We have seen so much of uh, trend in the market today, where analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning is picking up new workloads, is giving us newer insights. There are new business models that are happening every day. There are new startups, all based on these domains, which all rely on data, right? So now data has become the new oil. When we say that, I don't know if any one of y'all have actually visited a mining or an oil industry, and if you see the amount of security that they have out there, both in terms of physical and all the access controls. Similarly, the same philosophy applies when you start defining data as the new oil. You need to secure your data, because all the insights, all your business values resides in the data, right? Now that you agree on this philosophy that the data is the new oil and we need to secure it, where does the data reside? The data resides on storage, right? And since it resides on storage, all of a sudden, storage security becomes of paramount importance, right? And hence, we thought that it's important to kind of have have a session at the Techinta where we will talk about storage security. So then, what is storage security? Many of y'all would not be aware, and that there is an ISO standard for storage security, very specifically for storage security, which was contributed heavily by SNIA. Right. So I'm just going to read the definition because I don't want to tamper with the ISO definition of what storage security is. Right. So storage security is focused on protecting data and its storage infrastructure. So it's not only about data, but it's also about the infrastructure that is hosting the data against unauthorized disclosure, modification, or destruction while assuring its availability to the authorized user. This really definition sums up my entire presentation in reality, right? It's a very well put definition. Now, these controls may be preventive, detective, corrective, deterrent, recover, and compensatory in nature. So both these clubbed together is what is storage security, right? And I've just mentioned the ISO standard that talks about the storage security. Now, for me as a layman language, if what is the SNIA definition of it? SNIA definition of it says they are technical controls which may include integrity, confidentiality, and availability controls that protect storage resources and data from unauthorized users and use. Right, and these are the three ethos that we actually talked about in a previous slide, which was the CIA. Right, the C for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Right, which protects storage resources, that is the infrastructure as well as the data, from unauthorized users or use. So now that we have defined what is storage security, right, and why it is required, let's move on to understanding where does it impact, right, and what is that it is trying to protect. Now, this is one of my favorite slides because many a times when I discuss with customers or even with peer groups, people tend to ask, Sandeep, can you tell me the difference between data protection and data security in the context of storage, right? And they are really interrelated, but they're really different. And hence, this particular slide, if you really see, you have one pillar which talks about data protection. You have another pillar which talks about data security, right? And both together are actually helping us meet information assurance, right? And information assurance is what you strive for when you say about storage security. So storage security is all about ensuring and delivering information assurance, right? And information assurance has the ability to cover from failures, faults, and security attacks. So quickly on data security, which is the one pillar which is going to help you with information assurance, is information security, right? Which dwells with confidentiality, integrity, availability, the key CIA attributes or tenets of risk management, and accountability. Similarly, when it comes to data protection, it is information dependability, right? Where it is about reliability, availability, fault prevention, avoidance and tolerance, and performance, right? So many a times people say this data protection is all about RAID controllers. Yes, RAID controller is a part of data protection, right? But it is has to club with data security along with data protection, where you will be able to deliver your SLAs, which generally are to do with information assurance. So this is a very important slide. Once a person gets this slide, he starts understanding how do I now deploy my storage, how do I really do my storage deployments more in a more secure fashion, actually adhering to what my business policies or business requests are. And I should attribute SNIA for this. This is a slide that I have actually taken from SNIA Global Education Center. So now that we understand what are information assurance and what are the two pillars of information assurance, that's data security and data protection, let's move on to drivers for storage security. So what are those drivers? What are those drivers that help us or impose us to implement security in storages or storage subsystems? Now, when we talk about drivers, it's first important to understand who are the threat agents, right? For a storage, who are the threat agents who potentially may result in creating these breaches? Now, threat agents are divided into two halves. One is external, right, which is outside the perimeter. And what are these external threat agents? It has been defined at a very high level. It's nation states, right? It could be different nations. We have seen in recent times different countries accusing of each other of different breaches or different potential breaches, right? Which are actually the threat agents, and the threat agents actually become the entire nation. There are hackers, which are what we are more familiar with, or the malicious users who are trying to hack into the systems. Terrorists, cyber terrorists. There are organized crime, other criminal elements, international press, industrial competitors. And then there are internal. Now, internal are the ones which are inside the perimeter, and they are the ones which are actually more difficult than the external ones, especially for storage. Because what happens is, generally for external one, you also rely on your firewalls, your network perimeter security measures. But when it comes to internal, they are already inside your system, they're inside the perimeter, and so it's very important to understand that you have an internal threat as well. So who are there? There are some careless employees, and the careless employees, what I mean by them is they would not really intend the breach, but they would end up having a system in such a way that it results in a data loss or a data breach. Poorly trained employees, disgruntled employees, sometimes partners who have access to your particular data since they are part of a partners. Why it is important to know the threat agents? Because only when you know these threat agents will you be able to then really have a storage architecture which is more secure in nature. So what are the other drivers? Now when you talk about other drivers, it is important for us to understand what are the data breaches, right? So in the interest of time, I'm going to touch on quick snippets of these data breaches, right? So this is again, I picked it up from the ISO standard, right? And once you understand these data breaches, you'll again be able to better do a secure deployment of your storages. So theft for storage elements or media, right? So this is very common. Potential forms of data breach are unlawful access, unlawful disclosures, unlawful data loss, unlawful data destruction. The typical thing that we are more or less aware of. Loss of data, right? Now it can happen through unlawful, that means unauthorized users trying to breach in, or even accidental data destruction or corruption, right? For example, even doing some wrong labeling of your tapes and your wrong tape gets deleted or destructed actually causes data loss to an really unauthorized access that results into a data loss. Quickly, privileged users, abuses by authorized users. So many times people say your storage should not have root access, because if you have root access, the root is compromised, your entire storage could be compromised, right? And hence there are provisions like making use of sudo or making sure that the root users is not available. The point is your privileged users could actually abuse the data because they are privileged, and they could potentially access others data. Malicious data tampering by external or internal folks, like unlawful data destruction or alteration. And denial of service attacks. I wanted to highlight denial of service attacks because as storage we feel, hey, is denial of service attack important, or is data loss important? I think both are equally important. If you deny a particular storage from serving data, even if there's no data breach, you're actually getting the system down and you are not providing the SLA of information assurance that we talked earlier. So moving on quickly, drivers for storage security compliances. Compliances play a very important role. In fact, they kind of mandate security for the betterment of the particular business as well as the customers of those business. And there are typically many heavy penalties that are associated with compliances. Right? From business data perspective, different compliances have specific definitions of data that needs categorization and adherence to published guidelines. Right? Um, I'm going to quickly touch on the highlights in the interest of time. Right? Overall, compliances directly impose security requirements on storage. Right? So compliances become a driver for storage security. Now, when we say about compliance becomes a driver for storage security, it's important to understand what are those compliances. One, which typically, if you are a architect for a particular business, you would know what are the compliances for your business. But then, what are those elements of those compliances that are related to storage, right? Typically, when you read a compliance document, it is more generic in nature. It is applicable all over the place. It is for us to understand what in those compliance documents directly relate to the storage and storage security, so that you can have policies and configurations of your storage likewise. So here are a few slides where I have actually done a postmortem of a GDPR compliance, which was the most popular and talked about compliance in last year. And while it is more applicable for the European Union, really it talks about protection of personal data. That's applicable for businesses dealing with personal data anywhere, everywhere, right? And I'm just going to hit the highlight. GDPR was more about personal data. Personal data can be in form of structured, unstructured data. When it's unstructured data, it's file systems, and you need to make sure you have the relevant protection. So when you read the entire 100-page documents, you come to know, hey, there are certain requirements. For example, GDPR requirement Article 32, secure personal data, right? They talk about secure personal data. Now, what does that mean? It means for storage, I need to make sure I'm able to categorize personal data at a storage level, and I'm able to ensure that the required secure data like encryption at storage level is being guaranteed for that particular categories of data, right? That was Article 32. Similarly, uh, let me pick one more in the interest of time. Let me pick, let's say, uh, the first one, GDPR Article 17, right to erasure and to be forgotten. Right. So the article very clearly states that if a particular personal user wants the business to forget all about his personal data, right, that means they have a given particular period by when the entire infrastructure has to kind of erase the data permanently of that particular individual. Right? Now, what does it mean for storage? That's important for you to understand. What are the storage characteristics you need so that you could actually adhere to GDPR Article 17, right, which comes to data sanitization, it comes to secure delete of data. Right? Similarly, so this is an example that I gave as to what all things that you need to do when you actually have to comply to a particular compliance, and how do you derive those particular requirements onto storage. So now coming to storage security guidelines, right? So when you talk about storage security guidelines, it is always about people, policies, and control and technology, right? And you may kind of say that, Sandeep, is this really so simple? It sounds simple. What we have seen is people don't implement it, right? And today I'm going to talk you all through the high level guidelines, right? Yeah, many a times people come and ask me more about, hey Sandeep, which are the encryption algorithms that I need to make use of, let's say when I'm using NFS, so that I get the best of security and best of performance, right? Something similar, which are a low level details. In the interest of time today, we cannot cover them, but you can always reach out to me through LinkedIn and I could talk on that. So people, policies, and control, and technology. These are the three key attributes. Once you get these right, you typically would get your storage deployment more secured. People, it includes awareness, vigilance, continuous training. There is no running away from this. Policies and controls are very important. How do you translate your compliance understanding, your secure business policies, and translate them into policies for your storage? Technology, I have a slide on this which will talk about what are the 10 major technologies that you need to be aware of and feature you have to aware of when you buy a particular storage or deploy a storage technology. Now, the same applies for, I mean, all these, while it applies generically, it applies for storage security and both in private and public cloud storage as well. Now, while I talked about these particular three paradigms that you need to be aware of when you deploy storage security, there are security paradigms that you need to be aware of. Right? There are defense in depth where people go with layered security, right? And then there are data centric security, which is more of an emerging topic where you say you need to secure your data, right? Whether you have a layered security or not, because data is the new oil, and you actually ensure that that particular data, wherever it is residing, is completely secure. And it involves stages like discover, manage, protect, and monitor. The point I'm making is whichever security paradigm that you deploy, right, you would want to make sure that the three attributes are actually covered. So policy and planning, right? These are the guidelines. Incorporate storage into policies. It might sound so fundamentally naive, but this is where a lot of people tend to miss, right? Your actual business policies are somewhere else, and your storage policies, someone else is actually doing it. You need to make sure that you marry the two, right? You first need to identify your most sensitive and critical business data, and you need to categorize it, right? And that is where people struggle categorizing of business data and sensitive data. And there are few tools and techniques that are made available where you marry data discovery softwares. Just for example, like IBM Stored IQ, you marry it with some of the other file systems, like let's say IBM Spectrum Scale, and then you are able to discover the sensitive data, and then you are able to then define storage policies of protecting them, right? Integrate storage specific policies with other policies where possible, right? There are storage policies that are only actually concerned with the server side of the story, right? But you need to make sure, you need to be a little cognizant that that can directly impact the storage policies. People tend to do all the security for the server and they miss on the storage, whereas both has to be tied hand in hand. Data retention, data protection, media sanitization, all these policies directly come to storage and you need to plan for them. Ensure conformance with policies. Once you have defined them, it's obvious you need to actually help do some conformance with those policies, and that's where actually compliance and audit comes into picture. Review the policies then plans. So what happens is generally people don't review storage policies with business owners. It's important for y'all to kind of translate your policies for into business language and kind of review it with the business owners, which includes data retention plan as well as incident response plan. Many times organization at a storage level don't have an incident response plan. That means only when the incident happens they say, okay, now what to do, as opposed to proactively saying, if there is a breach that's going to happen, if there is a ransomware attack that's going to happen on me, on my storage, what should I be doing? Proactively have an incident response plan. And make sure storage participants in the continuity measures, right? It is not a one time activity, it is an iterative activity that you have to do. So policy and planning, while it sounds so naive, is the most critical one. User controls. Focus on user authentication and access controls. These are all basic ethos, right, that you'll have to follow. Changing default credential is the key. Avoid shared credentials. So many times I have seen that people share credentials even when it comes to storage administration. Try to leverage RBAC capabilities of storage where you can actually divide your administration controls across multiple administrators, right? Secure business partner connections, especially if those connections are going to touch storage, because storage is where your new oil is residing, right? Implement monitoring and reporting. It sounds simple, but people don't do it, right? Enable application logs as well as system logs, accountability and traceability. In modern times, what has happened is people take Elasticsearch, for example, which is an open source software, or take IBM Stored IQ, for example, right? Or take IBM QRadar, for example, which all does incident management for you. It can potentially kind of tell you that, you know what, these are the access trends on your storage systems, and if there is a violation of that access trend, it raises an alert. It can even lock your system down, or it can lock that particular user. So you need to make sure you can actually integrate your storage with these security softwares, right? They're called SCIM softwares, where you can actually have the accountability, traceability, and prevent potential breach that are happening. Use risk domains. uh, as Shalaka had said, risk management forms a key part of information assurance. So you need to make sure that you understand your risk. That when you talk about risk, you have to understand what is your data that is critical, what is the data which is less critical, uh, excuse me, which is the data which is less critical, and how do you really plan for that. My apologies. So protect the management interfaces from unauthorized access, right? The management interfaces, while at least most of the deployments I've seen, people are sensitive to the management interfaces. But as I just wanted to make sure that in the risk domain, management interfaces come right up there. Right? It has to be a number one risk domain that you want to address. And ensure that backups and replications don't become a source of unauthorized access. Simple example, people say I want to have a DR. They do a DR and then they have an authentication set up at the primary, and there's no authentication integration at the secondary site. So the secondary site is all exposed while they have a DR in place. And hence it's important to understand why you should have an authentication setup which are more or less common in both primary and secondary, right? These are all our basics, but these are what really forms the base of basic foundation for security for storage. So and implement essential controls, right? Achieve essential and then worry about excellence. People try to say, let me make the best of security, as opposed to making the best of security. First you want to understand your risk domain and achieve the essential, right? That's very important. Understand the security posture of your storage systems. So many times I've come across storage architects who deploy, and when we have a conversation and I ask a simple question saying, can you just explain me what is the security posture of your storage deployment? And they have a long pause, right? So it's important for you as storage architects to understand what is the security posture of your storage systems, right? And sanitization, overwriting using cryptographic mechanisms is actually very important in most of the controls when it comes to expiration of your business data. Now, quickly, technology requirements for storage. Now, this is a very important slide. People ask me, Sandeep, if I'm going to have a storage deployment, I'm going to purchase a particular storage equipment, or I'm going to go into cloud storage. What are the things that I should look for in that particular storage, right? So I've just given an applicability for file and object storage, and these are the elements that you need to look for in that particular offering. Secure data at rest, secure data in transit, authentication, authorization, secure administration, immutability, firewall, secure for Hadoop integration because it's about data and data is the new oil. Security and Hadoop is the common interface for deriving insights from that new oil. Security for hybrid cloud integration, audit logging, antivirus, malware protection. And this is what typically you will even see in RFPs that kind of match. But if you have all these characteristics, that particular offering, you're actually good to go. Now, little bit of detail, but in the interest of time, I would skip this. But what this slide is going to show is you haven't now if you have a question for me saying, okay, Sandeep, I've understood what is security, you gave us this, can you deep dive, can you tell me how do I secure my data, let us say, which is exposed by NFS and SMB, right? And this table exactly tells you of what you need to worry, right? First, you have to have data sensitivity. You need to categorize into low sensitive and high sensitive data, so these are those columns. And then you need to give priorities. One is the lowest, five is the highest. For confidentiality, integrity, availability, the CIA that we talked about, and S stands for system wide. And then you talk about all the different things that you need to consider when you deploy NFS and SMB. And then you can easily say, okay, which is the data that has to have high confidentiality, which is the data when I'm exposing through NFS that needs to have uh, high integrity or less availability. Once you are able to get this checklist right for your deployment, it is very easy for you to securely deploy your file storage, right? If you want more details on it, you actually can refer to the ISO standard, which gives these particular very well articulated tables. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to help you with. Uh, I wanted to make sure I introduced the ISO security standard for you. This is in standard by the ISO. It is called the ISO IEC 2704 2015 standard. It is a standard very specific to storage security. It covers block storage, file storage, object storage, cloud storage, right? So if you are either a storage professional or you are a practitioner, I will endorse this particular standard and you want to go and read about it. Uh, one quick slide where people wanted to say, okay, Sandeep, you talked about what is storage security. What are the future trends in storage security? What are you looking and thinking of, right? So new feature trends, right, which I see in the market is storage for cyber resilience, right? And you'll see a lot of companies coming up with white papers and positioning on storage for cyber resilience. What is cyber resilience? It's an organization's ability to continue delivering the intended outcomes, like despite of cyber attacks or incidents, right? And that's where storage plays a very important role. So is your storage cyber resilient, right? So that is one trend that's going in the market. What's the other trend is the use of cognitive techniques for data classification, like the AI MLDL. While it is disrupting all the workloads, it's also impacting storage, right? It's impacting storage in terms of how can we use AI MLDL for securely understanding which data needs to be identified to be secured with high grade of security and low grade of security relatively. So storage integration with such techniques ensuring right security for right data, right? So that's something that is trending. Geofencing of data, right? These compliances and data, when it's in cloud, people want to fence that data to a particular geography or particular location, and hence you geofencing of data to particular set of locations through all the access or protocols is something that's trending. And metadata management, right? The ability to derive insights, search data, And this especially I'm talking in terms of unstructured data, where you can get insights of the entire data by just looking at the metadata. That's basically called metadata management of unstructured data. It's something that is trending, and all these are directly impacting then your workloads. So this is my last slide summary of all that we have talked about. So IT security, quick one, continues to be top 3. Data breach and regulation compliance are the major driver. People, policy control, and technology are the major drivers for storage security. Classification of data. Remember, the CIA is an important aspect that one needs to think of. ISO IEC 27040-2015 is an ISO standard, which if you're not aware, I would say go and read about it. It's only dedicated to storage security. And newer features, trends are like cyber resilience, use of cognitive techniques for data classification, geofencing of data, metadata management for unstructured data. And finally, SNIA was an early source for storage security guidelines. I, being a SNIA technical council member, I would invite all of you all to join SNIA security working group, as well as SNIA India if you're a part of the Indian ecosystem. These are the acknowledgements that I need to make sure I list them. These are the kind of links that I have used for creating my slides, right? And IBM security, IBM Spectrum Scale Security is one of the products that I work on, which talks about all the different aspects of security that you can get through the IBM Security Spectrum Scale platform. So with this, thank you so much, and I'd like to hand it back to Shalaka and Dipti.
Hey Sandeep, thank you very much really for the informative session. Recently, I had actually started reading about security, and it's a big understand the end-to-end security gamut in an enterprise, and I really wanted to have some foundational layer to start building upon. And this session actually comes at the apt time for myself. It really gave me a very broader and stronger foundation to build upon. So thank you very much, really, and I'm very sure that all the subscribers to this channel and the viewers will really benefit a lot. I have sort of made a mental note to sort of make it easily realizable for myself, which is trying to relate the whole security into the 4 dimensions, which can be remembered as CIAA, which is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and accountability, and connect it with 3 broad pillars, which again a small abbreviation is called as PPT, which is people, process, and technology. And I think if we sort of keep relating all the features, functionalities that we want to implement, and the processes that we are trying to set, and the way we are trying to educate internal and external stakeholders, if we just keep going back to these 4 foundational pillars, pretty much I think we can start covering the base. So thank you very much for being here, spending time with us, and we will keep getting back to you as we want to get deeper into the technology front in storage security.
Thank you, Shalaka. You summarized it very well, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Please subscribe to the channel.
And please do ask questions if you have any. It's available, replays available on the YouTube. You can always ask your questions. And I know there are a few questions that have come in. We are going to reply to those questions. And thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.